For nearly 3 centuries, the world bore witness to the greatest continuous land empire in history, one whose scale surpassed Caesar's domains twofold and whose longevity eclipsed Napoleon's empire. This political entity, capable of shaking the world no less than Alexander the Great's conquests, belonged to the Mongols, a true fury that, like an unstoppable storm, erupted from the boundless steppes. In the early 13th century, these nomads forged an unprecedented style of warfare, unparalleled in its effectiveness and brutality, and so revolutionary that its principles continue to inspire military strategists even today. Sweeping everything in their path, advancing both east and west, they not only shattered the established world order, but also forged an entirely new course in human history. By the end of the 12th century, while the European continent was engulfed in the so-called Dark Ages, 2 prominent cultures set the tone for the development of human civilization. The flourishing Islamic states stretching across Persia and Central Asia, and, far to the east, the trio of fabulous kingdoms in China. Between these cradles of civilization lay the vast, inhospitable expanses of the Eurasian steppes. And though the steppes were harsh, they were far from empty. Nomadic tribes, Tatars, Mongols, and others, waged a harsh existence there, constantly battling for survival. These places are among the coldest on Earth. In Mongolia, temperatures could plummet to 90 degrees below zero, forcing inhabitants into a desperate struggle against nature for most of the year. Their lives offered no margin for error. Every moment was a test. In 1175, the Tatars once again fanned the flames of an old feud with the Mongols. These 2 tribes, so similar in lifestyle and beliefs, were bitterly divided by an ancient rivalry, an endless cycle of alliances, betrayals, and vengeful raids. Absorbed in their own internecine struggles, they seemed to completely disregard their common and far more powerful enemy, the rich and influential Jin dynasty, which ruled northern China. The Jin dynasty's policy towards the Mongol tribes was, in essence, a classic divide-and-conquer strategy. The Jin skillfully used the Tatars to raid other nomadic groups, tribes, and Khans who were beginning to gain too much strength and become potentially threatening. The Jin rulers wisely understood that as long as the steppe peoples were focused on fighting each other, they would not trouble their own prosperous lands. It was during this period of upheaval and uncertainty that the great Mongol conqueror, Genghis Khan, appeared on the historical stage. In the 12th century, he did not emerge from a family of kings or princes, nor from a noble lineage, but as a boy of no renown, who faced death alongside his family in the barren steppes. The name given to Genghis Khan at birth was Temujin, which in Mongolian means iron or blacksmith. This name proved remarkably apt. His entire life demanded a truly iron will and an unyielding spirit. In 1175, when he was barely 9 years old, his father, an influential clan leader, was treacherously poisoned by the Tatars. Genghis Khan's father was a promising tribal chief. Perhaps, had he survived, he might have become the next Khan of the Mongols, uniting them under his rule. But as soon as he was poisoned, the widows of the previous Khan, leveraging their influence, persuaded the Mongols to abandon both his widows, Genghis Khan's fathers, and young Genghis Khan himself. As a result, Genghis Khan was left alone in the steppe with his mother, abandoned with several children to fend for themselves. Temujin's mother gave him a simple yet powerful instruction: seek vengeance. It can be assumed that he grew up with a strong, burning sense of mission. He was the son of one of the leading chiefs, who had achieved 101 victories in war, while other chiefs had been defeated. Yet, he himself was abandoned, and this engendered a very strong sense of bitterness, a burning feeling that the world was wrong, unfair. For 30 grueling years, Temujin worked tirelessly to unite his clan and earn the title of Great Chief. He learned to trust only those who had proven their unwavering loyalty in battle, and he remained suspicious of everyone else, understanding that betrayal could lurk around every corner. By the age of 40, he had become not just a chief, but a gifted leader whose charisma was capable of inspiring and leading others. We see a man akin to Alexander the Great, and perhaps even Hitler, possessing immense, almost mystical charisma, who compelled people to follow him through the sheer force of his personality, his unyielding spirit. Having united his tribe in 1196, Temujin turned to his second, equally crucial task: revenge on the Tatars, his old enemies. The Mongols attacked using almost exclusively cavalry tactics, encompassing everything one might expect from a nomadic army. For instance, techniques perfected in hunting were often applied tactically in battles, feigned retreats designed to lure the enemy into a trap, encircling the enemy to deny them maneuver space, and outflanking the enemy to break their formation. Their tactics clearly showed elements reminiscent of modern blitzkrieg or lightning war. What is truly striking and novel about Temujin, Genghis Khan, is his brilliant reorganization of society, which should be considered one of the most important social and indeed military innovations. He took the old Central Asian Mongol tribal structure and reshaped it in his own image, in some ways breaking old tribal loyalties while simultaneously preserving and even enhancing the power of tribal cavalry. As far as historical records indicate, the Mongols emerged victorious in every battle they fought. The Mongols were significantly outnumbered by their enemies, but they were incomparably more mobile because each warrior had multiple horses, allowing for swift movements and maneuvers. And they appeared to operate in small tactical units, no more than a few dozen men, which made them incredibly flexible. So, the first thing you would see when fighting the Mongols was that they seemed to be everywhere, appearing from nowhere and vanishing just as suddenly. They would often approach you in a single line, giving the impression of a frontal assault, and then suddenly disperse and appear all around you, outflanking you. This was truly unsettling and disorienting for the enemy. The combination of honed Mongol horsemanship and unprecedented tactical strategy crushed their enemies, leaving them no chance. The Tatars were virtually wiped off the face of the earth in just 2 years of continuous fighting. Only their name would live on in history, and they were the first of many to fall under the onslaught of Mongol fury. Temujin transformed his army into the finest light cavalry the world had ever seen. He then exacted his revenge on the people who had caused so much suffering to his extended family and his immediate family, namely the Tatars, whom, when he finally defeated them, history states he ordered to execute everyone taller than a cartwheel, meaning all adult males. Thus, he ruthlessly annihilated this particular tribe, completing his vengeance and ushering in a new, terrifying era. A visionary leader, Temujin was a deeply religious man. He held a reverence for the natural order he observed around him. The earth was revered as sacred, rivers as sacred, but paramount over all was heaven, the patron of nomadic peoples. For Temujin, the earthly affairs of humans were meant to reflect this divine hierarchy, where one person would rise above all others. Temujin had no doubt that fate itself had destined him for the role of supreme ruler. He steadfastly believed that he came from a lineage chosen by heaven. Why? Because the outcome of battles, as well as all successes and failures in this world, were decided, in his firm conviction, by heaven, by God, by the eternal heaven or eternal God, in whose existence Genghis Khan steadfastly believed. In 1206, a council of steppe chiefs formally named Temujin universal ruler, or Genghis Khan. From then on, he was ready to embark on the conquest of the rest of the world, asserting his fame as the most ruthless of all barbarians. Driven by a burning thirst for revenge for his father's murder and inspired by a profound sense of his own destiny, in 1206, Genghis Khan emerged from the shadows of obscurity, standing on the threshold of global dominion. He became the supreme leader, the Khan of all the relentlessly moving nomadic peoples of the steppes. His people led a difficult existence amidst the harsh landscapes. It was a society in perpetual motion, always ready to strike camp at any moment. What did this say about their way of life? Their dwellings, yurts, had a framework of woven reeds to which felt was attached or sewn in separate panels. They could be erected in just 15 minutes and dismantled in about the same time. Inside the yurt, there was a pitch-black gloom mixed with acrid smoke, as the only openings were the top one for smoke to escape and the entrance. The entrance always faced south, for the Mongols were deeply superstitious, believing that good news came from the south. The floor was covered with felt. The walls were also covered with felt, creating a sense of absolute darkness, and everything was permeated with soot. What did they burn for fuel? There was no wood in the steppe, so dry dung was used for heating. Thus, The smoke was imbued not only with soot, but also with a distinct animal odor. This difficult existence hardened Genghis Khan's character, and his mother's instructions for vengeance became his life's purpose. This fact highlights the exceptional importance of the role that Mongol women played and continue to play in Mongol society. It was a key formative stage in his life, as he became genuinely attached to two women, his wife and his mother. It is highly probable that both of them played an extremely important role later, when he divided his domains and troops among his companions. Both women were granted their own appanages, which is a very significant point. Indeed, women served as the steadfast core and unifying link of the family clan. By 1206, Genghis Khan's influence over the steppes was undisputed. He now turned his vengeful gaze towards the prosperous and arrogant ruling Jin dynasty of China. In 1211, Mongol forces marched into China. The vast, ancient nation saw them merely as arrogant upstarts seeking minor disturbances. The Chinese had no inkling of the scale of the impending threat. In southern China, the Song dynasty, ethnic Chinese, often viewed the Mongols as potential allies. They held a rather curious perception of the Mongols. They considered them very crude, barbaric, and wild, yet untouched and uncorrupted by civilization. Within hours of the first encounter, Mongol forces crushed the numerically superior Chinese armies. The nomads demonstrated an astonishing ability to learn. They adopted advanced Chinese siege technology to overcome city walls. They became a living nightmare. Soon, they stopped beating their drums. These enormous drums were carried by 4 men on ropes, and their mere sound paralyzed people with mortal terror. The Mongols would bring prisoners from the previously captured city and throw them into the fortress moat to pave a path over the bodies of the fallen to the city walls. They then put everything living to death, sparing not even the daughters of military commanders. In 1215, they put the capital city of northern China, Zhongdu, modern Beijing, to fire and sword. But just as triumph loomed on the horizon, news arrived of emerging difficulties in the Mongol homeland. The news reached Genghis Khan across thousands of miles of territory, delivered by an astonishing communication system that eventually united the entire Mongol Empire. They developed at a very early stage a system known as the Yam, which was essentially a precursor to the future Pony Express. 2 riders would set out, carrying special insignia on their belts, indicating they were authorized representatives of the state. Horses awaited them at post stations located every 25 miles, allowing the two to continue their journey, carrying literally handwritten scrolls with important messages. In 1218, Yam riders brought Genghis Khan news that Kuklug, the Khan of the Naiman clan, was instigating rebellion among other dissatisfied tribesmen. Genghis Khan's hard-won order was threatened by the treachery of his own people. This could not be tolerated. In pursuit of the rebels, Genghis Khan launched a campaign that diverted him from pressing matters in China. Chasing the rebels westward into Muslim lands, the Mongols conquered one kingdom after another. Before entering each new territory, Genghis Khan offered local rulers a chance to surrender the instigators of the rebellion and submit without bloodshed. However, if a ruler resisted, Genghis Khan warned that he would show no mercy. To one chief, he wrote, "Calamity will befall your dominion too." Genghis Khan's campaign of revenge grew to incredible proportions, resulting in his empire reaching the borders of the ancient Khwarezmian Empire in modern-day Uzbekistan. Khwarezm presented a highly tempting target. Genghis Khan did not advance further. Instead, he grasped something important. The turning point in Genghis Khan's ascent, transforming his status from a regional chieftain of Outer Mongolia, which historically meant the wilderness or the end of the earth, into a significant player on the world stage, was a profound realization of his domain's strategic position on the Silk Road. He envisioned the opportunity to fundamentally alter his people's destiny through expanding trade ties. In this pursuit, he dispatched a series of diplomatic missions to his closest and powerful neighbor, Sultan Muhammad, the ruler of the Eastern Islamic world. These embassies were followed by an impressive caravan, consisting of 1,500 camels laden with untold riches. It was the extraordinary value of this trade caravan that likely awakened the unbridled greed of the Muslim governor of the Otrar border post. The latter unhesitatingly confiscated the entire cargo. When the Mongol merchant envoys, essentially a trade mission, arrived in the city, the local ruler, astonished by the caravan's abundance, asked Sultan Muhammad, "What should I do with them?" He unequivocally hinted at suspicions of espionage. "These Mongol envoys are spies. What should I do with them? May I destroy them?" Sultan Muhammad's answer was brief and categorical. Yes. And the Mongol envoys were ruthlessly executed. Genghis Khan, unaware of the tragedy, sent a second envoy, but he too was seized, his beard publicly shaved in the street as a sign of the deepest humiliation, after which he was sent back. The caravan of gifts, of course, was never returned. Genghis Khan's final message to Sultan Muhammad was simple and grim. "You have chosen war," it read. It was this event, a blatant violation of the sacred laws regarding the exchange of envoys and ensuring free passage for merchants across borders, that became the catalyst for the Mongol catastrophe. A catastrophe which, as one Russian chronicle recounts, left not an eye to weep for the dead. They came, they plundered, they burned, they killed, they left. It was complete devastation for the civilized world, and all this horror was unleashed by such a seemingly insignificant, yet fateful, trigger. As his warriors prepared for the grand campaign in 1219, Genghis Khan maintained a remarkable composure. "What must happen will happen," he often repeated, "and what will be, we do not know, only God knows." Convinced that he was fulfilling a divine plan, the Khan intended to teach his opponents a terrible lesson and continue a conquest that would crush all obstacles in his path, including the untold riches and accumulated knowledge of entire civilizations. By that time, Genghis Khan had already united the scattered nomadic Mongol tribes and conquered the wealthy Chinese states. Now, in 1219, he stood on the verge of a great battle with Sultan Muhammad, the powerful ruler of the Khwarezmian Empire in Central Asia. Genghis Khan was a man driven by an indomitable desire for retribution. In Otrar, the Sultan's governor had brazenly humiliated a Mongol diplomatic envoy, an insult that could not go unpunished. However, the Sultan's citadel, Samarkand, was defended by an army numerically and qualitatively far superior to Genghis Khan's forces. To even the odds, the Khan resorted to the proven tools that had served him successfully in the past: unprecedented mobility and surprise. Of particular interest in this specific campaign is the fact that Genghis Khan divided his army in the face of a significantly superior enemy. This is a tactic later associated with distinguished commanders such as Robert E. Lee, or with the concept of blitzkrieg during World War II. The main objective was to penetrate the enemy's rear, create chaos and diversion there, and then attack from strategically advantageous positions. Thus, this became a key element of his strategic design. Genghis Khan's first devastating blow struck the border city of Otrar in 1219. After a grueling 5-month siege, the Mongols breached the defenses and furiously devastated everything in their path. Their brutality knew no bounds, striking with mercilessness. Why the Mongols acted with such cruelty is a complex question, and a definitive explanation has yet to be found. However, there is no doubt that they waged war in a manner entirely unconventional for that time. A special and terrible fate awaited the greedy governor of Otrar. He learned firsthand the true meaning of the ancient Mongol proverb, "Return what people give you." Dragged from his refuge in the citadel, he was held while molten silver was poured into his eyes and ears, becoming a symbol of cruel retribution. In February 1220, Genghis Khan executed a triple attack, unparalleled in its cunning and treachery. The first 2 columns struck Khwarezm from opposite directions, east and west. Their main task was to convince Muhammad that these seemingly minor attacks represented the maximum of what the Mongols were capable. Medieval armies in Europe and the Middle East were deeply convinced that retreating in the face of the enemy was a disgrace, and therefore they could not afford it. Another reason was that, from the perspective of military commanders, once a retreat began, everyone around would start to think the battle was lost, and the army would instantly lose control. Soldiers would scatter, gripped by panic. "Oh, we've lost," or simply flee. The Mongols, on the other hand, deliberately retreated, and then suddenly, in the process of this retreat, they would scatter, begin to outflank the enemy, and barrage them with arrows. This was extremely disorienting for many armies. The constant hail of arrows raining down on the enemy also served as a powerful disorienting factor. Distracted by Mongol feints and constant skirmishes, Sultan Muhammad stretched his forces for hundreds of miles across farmlands and river valleys south of Samarkand. Meanwhile, far to the north, Genghis Khan prepared to deliver his main, decisive blow. Genghis Khan meticulously sought out smugglers and bandits who possessed knowledge of secret waterholes and camel trails in the scorching Kizilkum Desert. They were destined to become his guides, leading his army over 300 miles through the grueling desert sands, a strategic back door into the Sultan's realm. In March 1220, Genghis Khan and his army suddenly appeared from what the Sultan considered an utterly impassable desert, like the embodiment of his worst nightmares. As a result of one of the greatest strategic rear attacks in the history of military art, Samarkand fell in just 10 days. Sultan Muhammad demonstrated his true cowardice, fleeing for his life from one city to another, like a fox pursued by skilled hunters. The great Mongol commanders were allocated 20,000 warriors with orders to mercilessly destroy any city offering refuge to the fleeing sultan, as they relentlessly hunted and killed him. Thus, the Mongol objective was not merely to defeat an army on the battlefield, but to completely eradicate the country's power to its very foundations, to eliminate any possibility of subsequent recovery. They salted the fields, destroyed wells, flooded cities, cut canals, chopped down gardens, acting as if tomorrow would never come. The monstrous frenzy of the Mongols led to the devastation of magnificent Persian cities such as Balkh and Herat. Genghis Khan was completely indifferent to this destruction. They didn't care. The consequences of the destruction they brought to the Eastern Islamic world are still felt to this day. The ruins of once great cities are still scattered across Persia, resembling ghost towns. With the annexation of Khwarezm, Genghis Khan's empire stretched from the Yellow River to the Caspian Sea, becoming the largest continuous land empire in world history. The most remarkable consequence of this Mongol conquest was that the East opened up to the West for the first time in 1,000 years. The Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, made it possible for people to travel in complete safety from Rome to Beijing for the first time. This was unthinkable before and did not become possible again until the 20th century. This was no minor circumstance. People from the Middle East undertook extensive travels, even reaching China. The famous Moroccan traveler Ibn Battuta eventually reached, at least he claimed, China and journeyed through many Mongol successor states, Mongol polities ruled by Genghis Khan's descendants. This fostered a unique kind of mutual understanding as the civilizations of Eurasia learned more about each other. Ironically, the creation of such a vast empire was not Genghis Khan's primary goal. The flame of revenge still burned in his soul, and he had unfinished business with the Chinese. He now turned to this objective, but it proved to be the only one that remained beyond his reach. In 1227, at around 60 years old, Genghis Khan died during a campaign in China. According to tradition, he was the victim of a strange riding accident. Armed detachments and female slaves accompanied his body back to the steppes, where he was secretly laid to rest. There are stories that to ensure the secrecy of his burial, 50 guards were assigned. They were then killed by another 50, who, in turn, were killed by others, so that the grave would remain undisclosed for various reasons. However, the exact location of his tomb remains unknown. Mongol chiefs were buried in the strictest secrecy. They would embark on a funeral procession. The people who were to carry out the burial would blow horns and beat drums, making as much noise as possible. If anyone encountered the procession on the way to the secret burial site, they were immediately killed. The whole point was for no one to know where the great Mongols rested. Not a single tomb of a Mongol chief has ever been excavated, and nothing has been found to this day. Thus, we have not the slightest idea what they might contain. Genghis Khan's empire seems as lost as his mountain tomb, for after his death, the state he had sought to unite fragmented, divided into 4 kingdoms for his 4 sons. However, the dream lived on. It would transform into a nightmare in the hands of another Mongol conqueror, driven by visions of glory. He would unleash a reign of terror, even bloodier and more brutal than Genghis Khan's rule. As a result of a surge of violent conquests, the Mongol Empire continued to expand after Genghis Khan's death in 1227. In the west, the Golden Horde, descendants of Genghis Khan, ruled southern Russia and Turkestan. In the Far East, the Khan's grandson conquered and unified the three kingdoms of China. And in Persia, the Mongols converted to Islam, erecting magnificent mosques in glory of their new god. Nevertheless, however successful the Mongol Empire was, its colossal size made it difficult to maintain. There were not enough Mongols. It was not a giant nation, unlike, for example, China. The Mongol army likely numbered only about 100,000 men total. Consequently, the wider the territories they controlled, the thinner the veneer of Mongolian rule became over them. By the mid-14th century, Genghis Khan's empire lay in ruins, much like the old steppe clans. Rulers spent their time fighting amongst themselves instead of uniting their forces. Actual power slipped from the hands of Genghis Khan's descendants and passed into the hands of these tribal warlords, men who were not of the imperial family themselves, but were the true power brokers. In the mid-14th century, in the fertile lands of Khwarezm, now part of modern Uzbekistan, a young lad named Timur was plotting a daring sheep rustling from his neighbor. He was a shrewd and cunning opponent for shepherds, but this time, fortune turned against him. Legend has it that it was then he received a wound that never fully healed, condemning him to a lifelong limp. As his influence grew, he became known as Timur the Lame, and in the West, he entered history as Tamerlane. This name would, in time, strike fear into the hearts of his many enemies. By 1360, Timur had risen to the position of an influential emir, or chieftain, proving himself an outstanding chess master and a skilled strategist. Despite his Mongol heritage, he could not directly claim blood kinship with the great Genghis Khan. Therefore, he undertook efforts to create an elaborate genealogy linking him to the legendary conqueror. To legitimize his claims, he even married two women from Genghis Khan's lineage. Timur, undoubtedly, seemed to see himself restoring a certain version of Genghis Khan's historical legacy. This was his own interpretation, deeply reflecting his personal ambitions, and at a certain point, he perceived himself as a man of destiny. He saw himself not merely as an instrument in realizing Genghis Khan's righteous cause, but as a figure acting by his own right and will. By 1375, the restoration of the Mongol Empire was not Timur's only grand project. A century and a half after Genghis Khan had put Samarkand to the torch, Timur sought to transform his hometown into a true jewel of the world. He was born in this very region and always felt a deep attachment to what is now known as Uzbekistan, considering it his ancestral home. In the course of his military campaigns, wherever he went, he ruthlessly slaughtered all men in the captured city, but spared all artisans, transporting them back to Samarkand. Thus, one can imagine Samarkand flourishing with traditions from across the Muslim world, as well as from China and India. As a result, Samarkand became a truly exceptional city. It transformed into a garden city, and one of Timur's most important building initiatives was the creation of irrigation canals that allowed for entire suburbs teeming with magnificent gardens. Being a Muslim, Timur also actively constructed Muslim places of worship, using a significant portion of the spoils obtained from the conquest of India to build a truly colossal mosque. One of Timur's apparent characteristics was his boundless pride and, one might say, megalomania. This is clearly evident in the aforementioned mosque. It is striking in its size, featuring a gigantic entrance. This entrance reaches 50 feet high, and it was clearly meant to convey a certain impression. I, the humble little worshipper, must pass through this 50-foot doorway to enter. The splendor of Samarkand serves not only as a testament to Timur's power, but also to his brutal methods of maintaining order. Beyond Samarkand's walls, his ruthless cruelty became legendary. From 1385, Timur systematically plundered all of western Persia, as well as cities across Azerbaijan, Georgia, Armenia, and the Caucasus. Tens of thousands of people were slaughtered in his path. In 1398, Timur undertook a daring expedition across the world's most famous mountains, the Hindu Kush. He then devastated northern India. However, the further Timur expanded his domains, the more difficult it became to control hostile populations. When the inhabitants of Delhi rebelled against their new Mongol masters, Timur, taking a page from Genghis Khan's Book of Terror, wrote an even more horrifying chapter. Reports that he severed the heads of his victims and piled them into massive heaps are so frequent that one cannot help but wonder whether this is an accurate description or merely a rhetorical device. Nevertheless, this does not explain figures of 70,000 or 80,000 victims. It likely refers to the psychological warfare that the Mongols introduced. It's one thing to wage war, and quite another to use terror as a weapon, and this is precisely what Timur did. Timur drew upon Genghis Khan's legacy and effectively utilized it. He was even more terrifying in that he killed more brutally, more swiftly, but always spared the artisans. When it is said that he destroyed a city, it is, in a way, a metaphor, meaning that he killed enough people to make it look horrific, and then he brought back the best laborers, the best artisans, the best engineers, and the best produce from every conquered city. The modern skyline of Istanbul bears witness to the only dynasty that stood in the way of Timur's dream of a Genghisid empire, the Ottoman Turks. In 1402, Timur's expanding lands reached the impenetrable borders of the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid, whose pride bordered on arrogance. Neither of these leaders could tolerate the presence of the other. Timur even went so far as to insinuate about the dubious origins of Bayezid's mother, implying her low birth. Bayezid could no longer tolerate this. Leading one of the best armies in the world, the Sultan marched out from his fortress in Ankara to meet Timur's much smaller forces. Confident and imposing, he knew little of the cunning genius of the Mongol Timur. In 1402, provoked by the insults against him, Ottoman Sultan Bayezid hastened to meet Timur's forces. But Timur, knowing the Sultan's route, did not directly advance on the Turks. Moving cross-country, he caught the Sultan by surprise by besieging the Turkish stronghold of Ankara itself. For Bayezid, this was a truly humiliating turn of events. He had to hastily withdraw his forces, seeking to secure his own city. However, when his exhausted warriors, having endured a long march, finally reached their destination, they were completely unable to withstand the fresh and vigorous Mongol regiments. The situation was further exacerbated by the fact that in the midst of the fierce battle, an entire Turkish battalion suddenly defected to the Mongols, seeing one of their beloved princes fighting alongside Timur. Outmaneuvered by cunning, betrayed by his own subjects, and utterly defeated, Sultan Bayezid nevertheless showed nobility by refusing to abandon the battlefield. He was determined to fight to his last breath, but was ultimately captured. The defeat of the Ottoman forces undoubtedly brought satisfaction to Timur, but for Christian Europe, this event was infinitely more welcome. Looking at the overall strategic panorama of Eurasia during that period, it became clear that the Ottoman sultans were already on the verge of capturing Constantinople. They were rapidly advancing into Europe, encircling it, and were ready to begin a siege that threatened to destroy the main stronghold of Eastern Christendom. And it was at this critical moment, to their greatest misfortune, that none other than Timur knocked at their back door. The European response to Bayezid Yıldırım's crushing defeat was met with unbridled jubilation. After the defeat of the Ottomans in 1402, Timur's empire in size and influence nearly equaled the mighty empire of Genghis Khan. However, this, as expected, was not enough for the insatiable conqueror, who sought to etch his name into the annals of history forever. He was determined to surpass his great predecessor, and the only way to achieve this goal was by conquering what Genghis Khan had failed to achieve: China. Yet, like his great predecessor Genghis Khan, Timur mysteriously fell ill and died in 1405 during his grand campaign against China. His body was buried in Samarkand, in a tomb whose splendor and adornment sharply contrasted with the deliberate simplicity of Genghis Khan's final resting place. According to ancient legend, on his deathbed, he uttered prophetic words, "Do not disturb my tomb, for if you do, a fate worse than mine will befall you." And indeed, his mausoleum remained completely undisturbed for centuries, until June 22, 1941, when a group of Soviet archaeologists opened the tomb and found inside the skeleton of a tall man with a distinctive hip injury. Remarkably, on that very same day, June 22, 1941, Adolf Hitler launched his treacherous attack on Soviet Russia, which marked the beginning of a catastrophe that claimed the lives of approximately 20 million Russian people in the subsequent 4 years. Thus, it can be argued that Timur's influence proved extraordinarily long-lasting. with his long arm reaching directly into the events of the 20th century. Without Timur's exceptional force of personality and far-sighted leadership, his heirs were unable to maintain the integrity of the vast empire. The Mongols gradually began to fade from the stage of history. Being too few in number to effectively govern such extensive territories, they gradually assimilated into the cultures of the conquered peoples, adopting their religions and customs as their own. And yet, their influence on the course of global development remains truly immeasurable even today. By opening China to the Western world, the Mongols awakened an insatiable craving for exotic Asian goods. It was the desire to satisfy this need that served as a powerful stimulus for the age of discovery and maritime expeditions, which ultimately led Europeans to the shores of America. Truly, it was the Mongols, by crushing the ancient empires of China and Persia, who effectively gave birth to the modern world. An empire whose borders stretched from the Sea of Japan to the Baltic, from Korea to eastern Germany, and which encompassed the overwhelming majority of Eurasia, with the exception of India and Southeast Asia, was an unprecedented phenomenon in human history. Will the world ever see another such state, comparable in scale and influence? In Mongolia itself, some fervently cherish such a hope. Even today, Genghis Khan is revered there like a deity. His name serves as an inexhaustible source of national pride, and his tent is a sacred place of worship. It is not surprising, therefore, that the Mongols eagerly await the day when the ancient spirit will rise again, and the great barbarian